All right, what's up, epic fantasy fans? Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different from my prior videos. I really want to start a series of top 10 lists, and they're character based. So if you're familiar with the standard D&D classes like the warrior, the bard, the rogue, and the wizard, I basically want to do a series of videos where I break down like my top 10 characters from each of those classes and then do a overall, might even do one for like top 10 animal companions as well, top 10 heroines, and then hopefully, a couple months from now after doing, a top 10 character each week, I'll do like my top 10 or top 20 fantasy characters of all time. So, with my first video is going to be top 10 rogues. There's so many good rogues in the fantasy genre. I'd be hard pressed to find a fantasy series that doesn't have a rogue like character. And that being the case, and me having read a lot of fantasy, I couldn't narrow it down to just 10 rogues. So I have three honorable mentions. Okay, so I had some weird audio quality stuff going on when I recorded my honorable mentions. So I'm just going to go back over it. So my first honorable mention is Sister Kettle from Book of the Ancestor by Mark Lawrence. I got it right here. This is Tales of Abath, which is like short stories of that series. And yeah, I really enjoyed Sister Kettle. I thought she was an awesome rogue. She was badass. She was a cool assassin character, but she also was a big part of the heart of the series of Book of the Ancestor, which is a series about sisterhood and found family. And I think Sister Kettle's relationship with our protagonist Nona Gray was phenomenal, and that relationship is what earned her a spot as my honorable mention for favorite rogues of all time. All right, my second honorable mention is Anders from the Ties That Bind trilogy, and from the which is a trilogy that starts off the First Earth saga, and I believe Anders is in all of the works of the First Earth saga. Another series that falls within the First Earth saga by Rob J. Hayes is the Best Laid Plans duology, which won Spiffbo the first or second Spiffbo, I forget. And that's really what put the series on the map for me. But then I bought the first two books. I was like, oh, this is like, before I even opened them up, I realized there was a Ties That Bind trilogy, which took place in the same world a few years before. And that is where you're introduced to Anders. He is a drunk. He is um, an alcoholic. He's a lecherous individual. He reminded me a lot of a more sincere Prince Jolin from Mark Lawrence's Red Queen's War. And if you know me, I'm a huge Mark Lawrence fan, but the character of Jolin didn't necessarily work for me. Um, some parts of his character did work, but I digress. So to me, Anders is a perfect rogue while not being the most efficient assassin there is. He definitely lives up to that rogue demeanor, and he's just a blast to read on the page. He's my favorite character from the series, aside from maybe the Blackthorn. And I do think I might make another dedicated video. Let me know in the comments if that's something you'd want. But I think the First Earth Saga is the perfect series to read if you are in the mood for some Joe Abercrombie esque storytelling. And I really hope Rob J. Hayes returns to that universe, though I know his God Eater series and his War Eternal series, which I hope to read in the coming year, are far more popular. Now, speaking of Joe Abercrombie, my final honorable mention is a very layered and complex character, and he was so close to being number 10, but when you see number 10, you'd know why he got beaten out. And that is Nikmosa, is my last honorable mention. He is a rogue in the truest sense of the word. He's dishonest, he's disloyal, he's lecherous, he's unlike the previous two honorable mentions I mentioned that took like rogue characteristics but were relatively honorable and likable characters. Nikmo is like truly detestable. But he does have his own code and his own morals, and there's points in the First Law universe where you will hate him, and there's points that you will really root for him and be yelling at the page hoping he comes out on top. And that is why Nikmo Koska is my final honorable mention. All right, so getting into the top 10. My number 10 is a character that, if you are at all versed in epic fantasy, you already know her name, and that is Vin from Mistborn Era 1. Uh, so I've included Vin as my number 10 favorite rogue because I think she's a phenomenal protagonist. She maybe isn't what I expected going into Mistborn Era 1, but I do believe, she's part of that band of thieves. She feels free flying over the city, pushing off metals and, traveling through the mists. And while she's not as dark as a lot of rogues that are going to be on this list, I do think she isn't, at her core, is that rogue type character. If she was to be put in a D&D class, she would undoubtedly be a rogue. Even though Sanderson does some cool stuff with Vin's combat where, like, sometimes through the use of different metal burnings, this little girl can carry her momentum to, you know, attack others with giant weapons, comically big weapons. Think Guts from Berserk, and but I do think at her core she is still a rogue. My number 9 is another character, much like one of my honorable mentions, much like Anders. I don't know if a lot of people are aware of him, and that is Grub from The Darkwater Legacy by Chris Wooding, Grub the Scarl. So Grub is a warrior from the culture of people called the Scarl, where they have achievements that they tattoo upon their skin. Now, Grub, not to get into spoilers, Grub is a character that you wouldn't think of. Looking at him, you would not think rogue. He's big, he's hulking, he's covered in tattoos. If you see him, you know him, you know. Um, but every scene where he's sneaking around and doing some shady shit is just a blast. And I do think, aside from the main character of Darkwater, he's the best character in that series. Um, I wish there was fan art of Grub the Scarl. I think he's such an awesome character, and he's a character that, in the first half of book one, you really hate him. Like, I was hoping he would die, and I really think he will surprise you as the book goes on. And he's just an awesome rogue. He's loyal. Um, he's he's the rogue in all the best ways. He's sneaky. He's dastardly, but he loves his friends and he'll do anything for them once you get to a certain point. In the very beginning, he's much more like that definition of rogue I gave you earlier, where he's just a piece of shit, or a piece of garbage. So, number 8 is a character that most people are pretty familiar with, and that is going to be Arya Stark from the Song of Ice and Fire, A Song of Ice and Fire series. Um, I think back whenever I was first getting into fantasy, Arya probably would have been at the very, very top of this list. She's a lot of people's favorites. Is when they think of assassin, when they think of rogue, and I'm not sure if it was said in the books because the story never got that far, Martin. But that line she gave in, I think it was the final or second to final season of the HBO series, A Game of Thrones, she said, "Keep one wolf alive and the sheep are never safe." And I think that is such a badass line, and it perfectly conveys Arya's mindset to the audience. Like, and not just that, but also the way characters will view her. Even though she was the one to say that, it's like Arya is the character that, her enemies wake up and they should be in fear of her. Um, and that's, like, they're not safe. They are not safe from Arya Stark, and it's just such a badass, get your blood pumping knowing that Arya is going to cross that name off her list. So number 7 is a character that I think is criminally underrated. This character got his start in a video game called Enderall, which is a mod of the much more popular game Skyrim. And I am not a gamer. I used to be, but I haven't really. I have a Nintendo Switch that's been in the box for 2 years, so I wouldn't call myself a gamer by any stretch of the word. But I do remember whenever I was into Skyrim, I saw the mod Enderall, and I never got around to playing it. Years later, Patrick Leo is doing a review of this book called Dreams of the Dying, which was part of a series called Enderall, which has now been rebranded as The 12th World because of licensing and weird stuff going on. And the character of Jespar Del Veric, which is what I knew him as when I read the book Dreams of the Dying, is now Jespar Trey Moresti. Jespar Trey Moresti. See, I had to look that up because when I was reading Dreams of the Dying, it was Del Veric. But Jespar, who is the main character of the 12th World, previously known as Enderall, is a former mercenary, but kind of like a mercenary branch that was similar to the Peace Corps. Um, he is a roguish type character. He may not be an assassin, but he's a knife thrower. He's a dastardly little character. He's a mercenary, which is a very rogue profession. But I do think Jespar is a very endearing character. It's very hard to read him and not um, love him and empathize with him, and he is very relatable in a lot of ways. If you've ever suffered from depression, I believe the way Nicholas Lietzau, author of The 12th World, is able to tackle Jespar's overwhelming feelings of melancholia and depression is just bar none, and I cannot wait for books 2 and 3. I believe he said book 2 will be coming out Q2 2025, and that is definitely The Cure for Living. I think book 2 is going to be called, but I'm not sure. And that will be a day one read for me. I love the character of Jespar Trey Moresti Del Veric, and I can't wait. And I think it's really sad that he wasn't allowed to use the names and stuff from the games in his book, but I also think it'll be very good for the series overall because he's no longer confined to telling a prequel to a video game. It's essentially its own world now, and he could choose to tell the same story he was going to tell, or he could do something. He could go in directions we didn't even think were possible because he no longer has to make that book series lead up to the game. So my number 6 is Stellan from the Manifest Delusion series by Michael R. Fletcher. Now, I have not read this book, A War to End All, but I have read his other 3 Manifest Delusions books, and this is the final one. It's a trilogy with a spin-off book in between books 2 and 3, and I loved the spin-off. I loved book 2. Book 1, I'd give it like a 3.5, 4 stars. Everything else has been 5 stars. And my favorite character by far from this world is Stellan, and I went into it thinking Bedecked and Witchtig would be my favorites, and this dastardly woman right here absolutely stole the show. She is a rogue and a half. She will, if she feels in any way disrespected, she's so unhinged, she will kill a whole room full of people if she feels even in the slightest way insulted by one person in the room. She's insane. And somehow he's able to write a character that I should detest in the most real and honest and there's a sensitivity to Stellan that I feel like you would be hard pressed not to really fall in love with her character. And while she may disgust me, and while she may be just beyond redemption, as book 1 is called, she is beyond redemption. She's not beyond my empathy for her. I love her as a character. I cannot wait to read A War to End All and see where her character ends up. And yeah, so that's my number 6 pick. All right, so my number 5 pick is really difficult because, I never explained this, but I'm only using one rogue from each series, and that made the time for picking my favorite rogue in Malazan Book of the Fallen really, really difficult. There were some contenders for my favorite rogues from Malazan, and honestly, a few of them would be on this list and would have forced, Vin and Grub off the list. And some characters that didn't quite make the cut from Malazan that I definitely think are up there rogue-wise is Crocus, Rallic Nam, and then the real one that was really, really fighting for my number 5 spot is Kalam Makar of the Bridge Burners. Absolute badass character. Love Kalam Makar. Love him in Quick Ben's dynamic. Thought he was amazing, but I digress. The character that I'm actually picking from Malazan Book of the Fallen is known by many names. Some call her Sari. In book 1, she's known as Sari, but at the end of the book, you learn her real name, which is Apsalar. Apsalar is the best rogue in the series, including Cotillion. Cotillion's another one that I didn't mention that was right up here with Kalam and Sari. I love the character of Cotillion. I think he's so nuanced, but just something about Apsalar made that duality between divinity and humanity a little bit more real than it did for Cotillion. Within the 10 books of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, when you get Cotillion's story fleshed out more in Path to Ascendancy, he might take that edge from her. But I think in the terms of like a badass rogue, but also a very human character, Sari, Apsalar, who is also called Sari, takes the number 5 spot for my 5th favorite rogue of all time. And for my number 4 spot, I have Royce Melbourne from Rhaenyra Revelations. I feel like both members of Rhaenyra from that series, which Rhaenyra is Elvish for 2, and you follow 2 thieves, I feel like Royce Melbourne and Hadrian Blackwater both fit into that rogue-ish character type. But I believe Hadrian has more of a fighter, more of a noble fighter type of. If I make my top 10 fighters, Hadrian will probably be on there. But as far as best rogue goes, I mean, just something about the demon from Ratibor. I just think Royce Melbourne is so cool and so dope. And he's kind of what I wanted Vin to be from Mistborn. I remember reading Mistborn and everyone, like all the artwork of Vin I thought was so cool. And what I thought her character was is what like Royce actually was for me. Really love Royce as a character. And I don't know if he'll be in any more Alon books. I just finished Drumendor, and it seemed like it put a pretty good cap onto his and Hadrian's story. But Michael J. Sullivan comes back to those characters every few years with a new story to tell, and it always fits. So I'm excited for anything else in the world of Elon, especially if it has to do with Royce Melbourne. He's probably my favorite character Michael's made. All right, so my number 3 spot is, a lot of people would view him as a fighter. Myself included, I think he fits both the rogue and the fighter class relatively well. That being said, him being on this list means that he will not be on my fighter list. And this character is Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir to Isildur, aka Strider. Now, a lot of people would say, no, he's more of a fighter. He fights on the battlefield. You don't see Aragorn going and assassinating people. And while that is true, the appearance of Strider in that dark hood, where you think he's a villain at first when you're first reading Fellowship of the Ring, and there's this dark ringwraith looking cloaked figure sitting in the corner, that scene alone and the way Aragorn / Strider is presented to the reader is something that is mimicked in almost every portrayal of a rogue since Tolkien. So I believe that the rogue idea of a character would not exist without Aragorn. There's other influences like Grey Mouser. I'm not saying that he is the epitome of rogues and that rogues didn't exist before Aragorn, but rogues as we know them in modern day epic fantasy literature, I do believe a space was paid for them by Aragorn, and for that reason alone, he's my number 4 pick for favorite rogue. I lie, number 3 pick, my bad. All right, so we're down to my top 2, which these top 2, this whole list is set pretty solidly, but these top 2 are, without a doubt, 2 of my favorite characters in all of fiction, and they will be on my top 10, top 20 characters of all time, probably near the top 5. So number 2 was my favorite character from the age of 13 till about 22. He was my favorite character that whole time, and that is Locke Lamora from The Gentleman Bastard sequence by Scott Lynch, book 1 being Lies of Locke Lamora. Locke Lamora is just a phenomenal character. He's the perfect con artist type character. He is both the older brother to some of the Gentleman Bastards while also being the mischievous little brother. He's their fearless leader, and he's their clueless saboteur. He causes the Gentleman Bastards some of their worst pains, but he's also the one that they turn to when hope is lost and they're scared, they turn to Lamora to hatch the most dastardly and deadly schemes. And uh, Lamora, unlike a lot of other characters on here, he's not badass with a blade. He's not going to get in there while you're sleeping and kill you. He's not going to, sneak up on people and murder them, though he is sneaky. Lamora's greatest weapon is his mind and his very silver tongue, I would say. He can talk himself out of any situation, and his mind is just can his ability to improvise in the middle of a con is insane. All right, so number one favorite rogue in all of fantasy literature is Fitz Chivalry Farseer from the Farseer trilogy and the overall Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. Um, Fitz, to he is, but the first book in the Realm of the Elderlings is called Assassin's Apprentice, and I think that title of the book, Assassin's Apprentice, is very misleading because Fitz's character journey is not, it doesn't feel like it's about an assassin. An assassin is what he does, but it's not who he is. And I think at his core, he's more noble than a rogue, but his family kind of forced him into that rogue position. They forced him to become a rogue. He would have been a noble-hearted boy. He would have been a musician. He would have been an artist. And he was forced into this rogue lifestyle. He was forced to become an assassin, to train in the deadly arts. And that duality of who Fitz could have been and who he is now is both heartbreaking and beautiful. And I believe Fitz is, without a doubt, one of the greatest characters, not just in fantasy literature, but in literature in general. He's my favorite rogue. And yeah, I just really love Fitz Chivalry Farseer. And he'll always have a place in my heart. I forget which side is it. I have a tattoo of Fiddler and I have a tattoo of the Fool from Realm of the Elderlings, and the Fool is the best friend of Fitz. So obviously, like, Robin Hobb's series holds a very special place in my heart if I have a Fool tattoo, which was almost a Fitz tattoo, but I don't know. I just feel like the Fool was like a more interesting art choice, and yeah. So yeah, those are my top 10 favorite rogues from epic fantasy and fantasy literature in general. Please comment and like and tell me in the comment section who your favorite rogue is, because I am definitely currently in the mood for some roguish type stories. I'm familiar with the Night Angel series by Brent Weeks. I'm familiar of King's Dark Tidings by Kelcade. These are things I'm familiar with, but I haven't actually started. Let me know if there's something I should start, or if there's some Assassin series that's even more under the radar that I haven't even heard about. Let me know in the comments, and just any book that you think I might enjoy. Peace.